Hello, property nomads. Hope you're well. Beware of Britain's ticking debt time bomb. We all have to be aware of this because it's coming. It's not as bad as it is in the US, where they are adding over $1 trillion worth of debt per quarter at the moment. But we have to be aware of this because it's going to create a lot of opportunity if you are the right side of some trades and you're in the right businesses moving forwards. So the purpose of this episode is to identify what this time bomb is and then how we could possibly look to get on the right side of it, just so we're not affected. Because when this comes down, and it will come down at some point because we're on a very unsustainable path, then that's going to have a significant impact both on the UK and worldwide. The other country really to look out for in all of this is the United States of America. As I mentioned, they are adding roughly $1 trillion per quarter to their debt clock, and it is about 34 trillion at the moment. And that's a scary number. Ours is nothing like that, but it's still scary enough. So we've had financial issues before. I wasn't around in the 1970s when Britain had to go and beg to the International Monetary Fund because we had a lot of issues in the country at that time. By speaking to various older property investors and parents as well, and they said, yeah, the 1970s wasn't exactly the best for the state of Britain's finances. Inflation has run very high, mid-20s, I believe, large government borrowing, mounting public debt, and they were worrying potential buyers of government bonds, and interest rates were having to rise in an attempt to bring funds in. That was the 1970s, and that should probably sound quite familiar to you in the 2020s. Because we've got inflation running away at the moment. I would say the government stats will tell you it's come back down, but if you've had to top up your car recently, you'd probably appreciate that that's anywhere between 30 and 50% up in the last couple of years. We're looking at the government is borrowing more and more and more. We've got mounting public debt as well, purely because we're just printing currency for the fun of it. And interest rates have increased. They've gone up from roughly the 0% that they were a little while ago up to a relatively normal rate of 5.25%. And again, that's a historical average for the Bank of England since 1694. So there's a lot of similarities between the 1970s and where we are today. Now, normally, what the government has done historically in Britain or the United Kingdom, it responds to crises like wars and pandemics by opening the checkbook, like most governments do, and then it lets economic growth and reduced borrowing shrink the burden afterwards. So I would like to say we're relatively fiscally reliable, but that's the game book that we play. The challenge that we've got is it doesn't seem to be true nowadays, because we've got more inquiries going on. People asking whether the government's fiscal rules are fit for purpose. We're now borrowing even larger sums of cash at the moment, and we're at a relative peacetime, dare I say. We might not be for much longer, but at the moment we're in a relatively peacetime. And the baseline projection is for the primary balance. So basically that's the deficit excluding interest payments, is to swell to 10% of GDP by 2070. The debt interest payments will reach 13% of GDP by that time, and the total debt pile a staggering 310%, and it's still on an upwards trajectory. Now, that's also on the assumption that nothing bad will happen between now and 2070, which I'm sure you can appreciate is probably not going to be the case. But just to highlight what's going on is that we've got all this debt at a national level. That debt is now 8 times higher than it was 20 years ago, which isn't good. And we are now facing demographic shifts as well, where the population is getting older, baby boomers, etc. So there's a lot more pressure on the tax-paying folk in the United Kingdom. And we're in this trap where we are pushing for things like net zero. Defense budgets are increasing as well. And again, that's a different podcast. And we're in this trap where borrowing was inexplicably cheap. It's now back to its normal levels at around 5.25%. And we're in this debt spiral, basically. And we're in this debt spiral, and that in the course of history and in course of anything that you read, anything that you might study, it doesn't end up very well. It normally ends up in a major reset. And that is where I think we're going to be heading in the future. So Britain's debt is a ticking time bomb. Now, that will create opportunities, because what could happen, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but what could happen is if we look to write off all the debt, or we have a debt reset, then what could happen is that everyone might go back to a gold standard. We had a gold standard in the late 19th century. Everything was pegged to gold. We might find that we go back to a gold standard. Now, if we go back to a gold standard based on the current debt that we've got, not just the UK, but globally, the price of gold could be anywhere between $5,000 to $20,000, maybe even $25,000. And that's plausible depending on how gold is revalued in comparison to currencies. Again, we're not IFAs, we're not independent financial advisors. We're not going out and saying, go buy gold. We're saying, if you study this, this has happened before, this is likely to happen again, it might be an idea for you to get on the right side of that. Inflation's going to erode away, some debt as well, et cetera. But we're, in a nutshell, we're in this death spiral where it's just going to implode, basically. But government, mainstream media, we're going to keep the game ticking along for as long as possible. And we're just going to pass the buck down to the next people, the next government, the next generation as well. There's multiple roots of the problem. People will say it's demographics. I think that's got a part of it. Again, we've got a lot of people relying on the state now, even more so moving forwards. Healthcare system, it isn't perfect. I think it could be run better to make it more efficient, and that would help moving forwards. And of course, we're up in defence as well. You can put that into your own conclusions. Some of it is down to the unwillingness of politicians to make hard decisions. And again, it's kicking the can down the road. It's jam today, as they say, because people don't want to make hard decisions. Now, whether people like to admit it or not, let's look at things that Westminster have pissed away cash at recently. Big, ginormous infrastructure schemes. Network North is now being touted to replace this high-speed 2 rail project between London and Birmingham. That is a project that shouldn't have been built, or should not be being built in the first place, because there were so many other easy wins on the rail network that would have been much more cost effective. Again, that could have helped the larger economy rather than just building a new rail line between London and Birmingham. That's, I mean, with all due respect to Birmingham, who wants to get there 20 minutes quicker? I certainly don't. But I appreciate, as second biggest city in the UK, it's got a big attraction, and it's done a lot of great things for the country. So I'm being slightly facetious when I say that, but ultimately that's what this railway is doing. Is you're getting into London 20 minutes quicker, but you're getting into Birmingham 20 minutes quicker. How does that really impact the rest of the UK? The answer is it probably won't. But the government have pissed billions on that. That doesn't help. A lot of billions have been wasted on other things such as middle management, the NHS. I like the NHS. But if we look at how it's been managed and all these middle management systems and all these consultancies that we need, it's not cash efficient. It isn't, but it probably can be if the right people are in the right place making decisions. Government and previous governments are just printing currency like wildfire, and it will catch up with us in the future. And that is a very, very dangerous thing. So rather than sit here and bash the government, I'm going to give you a Margaret Thatcher quote, love her or hate her. And her quote is, when there is only so much to spend, you have to make choices. That's it. She also said something along the lines of, budgeting the government or running the government is like household budgeting. And that is where the quote, when there is only so much money to spend, you have to make choices. Our government don't want to make choices. They just want to pass the buck down to what is likely going to be a Labour government majority later on this year. And they're going to have their own issues, and they're going to park that bus. Excuse me. They're then going to pass the buck down to the next government and so forth. What we shouldn't do, and what we're not going to do as investors, as people that look at macro things as well as property, we are not just going to sit back and take it. This is why we are saying that it's important for you to learn about the history of gold, about the history of silver, and to maybe research what has come before and what could happen moving forward. If you haven't already got involved in property, please do go and get involved in property. It might be an idea to go and do some networking, go and do some joint venturing, get your first few properties under your belt, because it will be a way to help protect you moving forwards. Because when Britain's debt time bomb explodes, it's going to be horrible, and it's going to be horrible for you, and it's going to be horrible for most people that haven't prepared. What else can you do? Maybe you are already in property. Maybe you can look at diversifying your strategy. Maybe I've got a buy-to-let portfolio. Maybe you can go out and do developments. But I hear you say, Rob, if there's a debt time bomb, how's that going to benefit me? Go networking, speak to people that have got large sums of cash. Find these people, they do exist. Maybe you could joint venture as well, doing some developments. We might find that asset prices might get remarkably cheap when everything implodes and people have got nowhere to go. Part of being a property investor is that we aim to provide win-win situations. If there are distressed landlords out there and distressed vendors out there, we are here to offer a solution to help them. We create win-win situations. That's what we need to do. Go and hunt down as many win-win situations as you can. Because ultimately, this ticking time bomb has been happening for a very, very, very long time. It's probably not going to last much longer, because we're in that death spiral, and we're going to see that more significantly in the US as well, where the income that we generate through taxes or whatever income we generate might get to the stage where it might not even be enough to just pay for the expenses. And if you run a household, or you run a government, or you run your own business, when your expenses are continually higher than your income, that is not sustainable. It's not sustainable, full stop. And the only way you're going to get out of that is by increasing your income, lowering your expenses. If you don't do those things, you're probably just going to implode. And that rings true in all walks of life. So just to summarize, we in the UK, we've got a ticking debt time bomb. Our debt's increasing, our debt to GDP is increasing. It's not sustainable. It's eerily similar to the 1970s in terms of what's going on from a macro point of view. The government, and then this falls of all forms of government, are just pushing they're pushing this problem further on down the line. That's not healthy. We could potentially, when everything implodes, we could potentially go back to a gold standard. If we do, that might be a place that you want to be in the future. But we're in this spiral where everything's just going to compound, and compound in not a good way. That being said, that's going to create a lot of opportunities, because as the national debt becomes more unsustainable, if you are networking and you know people with large chunks of cash, we might find that when everything implodes, asset values decrease. If they decrease, that just presents buying opportunities, that creates JVs, that could create a lot of cash for you and I when we're going in and buying all these buildings that we've got our eyes on. And also, if we sat there with gold and silver, that might also be incredibly beneficial, especially as we come out from the other side with potentially a new gold-based currency system. Who knows what will happen? Only time will tell. But this is about preparing for that and looking at what's happened before and looking at what is likely to happen moving forward. At the end of the day, if you have more expenses than you do your income, that is not sustainable. The way to sort that is to lower your expenditure, increase your income, and then balance your books. Whether it's your business, whether it's your household, whether it's government, you have to be able to balance your books. You have to be able to make choices. And an adage that I heard recently was, it's good to fix your roof while it's raining hard, because if you don't do that, the situation is just going to get worse. Ultimately, we should not rely on the government for all of this. We have to rely on ourselves, and that's what as good entrepreneurs you should be doing, and that's what we should be doing as well. That's why we produce these podcasts and try and add as much value as we can moving forward. What we would say is a small favor from you. If you haven't already done so, please go and subscribe to the podcast. The podcast content that we do is different from the YouTube content. Favor number 2 is please go over to our YouTube channel, YouTube/Property Nomads, or the Property Nomads podcast. A link is in the show notes. Do go over to our YouTube channel, subscribe to the YouTube channel as well, because there's a lot of great content on there. We will help you to prepare as best as you can by providing as much value and content as we can. So thank you for subscribing. It also helps to get the message out there and to grow both channels as well. But please be aware of Britain's ticking debt time bomb. It's not going to end up very pretty at all, but we can get on the right side of it by being prepared, because we understand the opportunities that are going to present themselves moving forwards. Thank you for listening. See you in the next episode.